The URC semi-finals have officially wrapped up, and now we know exactly who's going to be entertaining us in this exhilarating final happening next week Friday. It's going to be Bulls taking on Leinster in Ireland. We look back at the semi-finals where the Bulls managed to overcome Glasgow and Leinster managed to overcome the Stormers. So let's have a look at why the Bulls and Leinster managed to overcome their foes. Firstly, the first semi-final we had was Bulls v Glasgow, ending in 22-21 to the Bulls. After the Bulls came back, a 21-3 deficit down, they came back and they ended up winning the entire match. So let's have a look at why that was so. So firstly, we see that Glasgow were able to exploit the Bulls around the outside. They were able to get around the Bulls. Now this would be a worry for Johan Ackermann's side, that a team of high caliber like Leinster might also be able to get around them. Now we also see that the Bulls scrum was actually very dominant, and this is something that they've had for the entire season. So maybe they would be liking to exploit this against Leinster next week Friday. We also see that the Bulls like to put some forwards in the wide channel on attack. We saw Cameron Honeycomb running down the wing a couple of times in that semi-final, and it worked quite well for them. So I imagine we would likely see that as well, with Cameron Honeycomb taking on some wingers and maybe getting a matchup where he can use his big size and his hard carrying to get some gain line for the Bulls. Beyond that as well, we actually saw Glasgow with a very impressive maul against the Bulls. This might be something that the Bulls will need to work on, a potential weak point that the Bulls have, because if Leinster manage to find out this weak point and exploit that more, they could very well do that and defeat the Bulls again in another final. Now we have to see the issues with the Bulls' game as well was that they had a lot of knock-ons, especially in that second half. They were just knocking on the ball so often. I was listening to the commentator and he just said, oh, so-and-so has knocked on the ball from the Bulls. And it's lucky that they have a good scrum because they used that scrum quite a few times. And also, one of the big elephants in the room was Handré Pollard, the two-time World Cup winner and personal hero of mine, missing 3 kicks off the tee, which was quite ridiculous for a man of his caliber. However, in Polly we trust. We always trust that Handré Pollard will be back and will be at the level that we expect him to be. So all in all, my thoughts on this game were that the Bulls were the typical Bulls. They fronted up with big, heavy, tough forwards. They got their gain line. They bullied the opposition up front, and they managed to exploit gaps through that, right? We see that they were never perfect. I think there were a lot of times, as I've said, with knock-ons, with Pollard missing his kicks, that they should have put Glasgow away even earlier, especially having come down from 21-3, coming back and then taking the lead. They should have actually been 10 points ahead at the end of that game, but they didn't really take their opportunities that well, which made it a 1-point game. I'd also like to say that my prediction for this match was that the Bulls were going to win by 5, but they only won by 1, so I was off by 4. So that's okay. It's reasonably close. I think if Polly managed to get a kick or two, I would be happy. But that's okay. So I think that the Bulls will need to tighten up. Their defenses were good, definitely good. I think on the front lines, they were very good. Perhaps on the outside, especially with Polly getting the yellow, they need to be careful of being exploited on the outside with Leinster's absolute massive wingers and Leinster's Rico Ioane and these kinds of guys who will just shred defenses if they even sniff a gap. The Bulls need to be very careful of this. So I want to conclude by saying that the Bulls, I think, deserved this win, although they were not as great. I think the better team won. I do think that the Bulls will be very, very, very hungry going into this final. It's a repeat of last year's final, and it will be amazingly saucy. I think the Bulls will be so hungry to finally get their hands on that URC trophy. They've been to more finals than anyone, if I remember correctly, and they haven't won it at all. So I think this year could be the year that the Bulls try to stake their claim onto the trophy. However, that's going to be very tough when the opposition happens to be Leinster. Now let's have a look at the second semi-final. So it finished 20 points to 11 in favour of Leinster, the Stormers falling short at the end. But that in and of itself doesn't tell the entire story. The first 20-30 minutes, Leinster dominated everything. Possession, territory, just everything was just dominated by Leinster. It was the Leinster show, which means that they like to have these quick starts. They like to have these absolutely bull in a china shop right out of the gate, just bashing teams, going around the outside, shredding your defense, just doing everything. Leinster like that. They like having these quick starts, and it seems as though possession is very important for that. So having that possession, I mean, they had a ridiculous statistic, like 80% possession in the first 20-30 minutes or something. It was crazy. And so possession for Leinster will be very important, which means the Bulls need to be able to match that with excellent defense, with winning the ball at the breakdown, and just generally fronting up as well, which I think the Bulls might be able to do. However, Leinster are very good in this area. One area where they might be slightly weak, especially against the Bulls, is at scrum time. We saw them getting minced by the Stormers, and the Stormers don't have a scrum nearly as good as the Bulls. So this could be a potential weak point for Leinster and a potential advantage for the Bulls going into the final. And still, I thought that it was a little bit close at the end when the Stormers had 13 men. I thought that Leinster didn't quite go for the jugular. They didn't quite just end this game. It was only 9 points difference. I predicted a 10-point difference, by the way, and it was 9 points. So that was very close. But it was still extremely, extremely close, I thought. Even though Stormers only had 13 men, Leinster didn't necessarily put them away. They only really scored that last try by Jamison Gibson-Park, I feel, because Jamison Gibson-Park is who he is. Not necessarily because Leinster were playing really well. It's more so just because Jamison Gibson-Park is who he is. Now, that's not to take away from that try at all in general. It's just to say that they maybe lacked slight conviction in that final 20-ish minutes of the game. And that's something that the Bulls also needed to work on, because they too very much lacked the ability to put that game away. So it'll be an interesting toss-up, an interesting arm wrestle for that final 20. I do think if Leinster do have a massive advantage going into that, obviously I think Leinster will win. Whoever has the advantage going into that final 20, I think will be able to win. That's my prediction. I do think that the Stormers played exceptionally well, except for the fact that they were just so sloppy. Like, they were doing everything. Everything was just with 120% effort, okay? It's just that also means that there are a little bit more knock-ons, there are a little bit more basic mind errors. The amount of cards that they gave away is ridiculous, okay? And I don't think that the Bulls are going to give away that many yellows and reds into this game. Although I do think at least 2 yellow cards are going to be seen in this game for each side, either side, who knows. I think at least 2 yellow cards will be seen in this final, which will make it extremely spicy. All in all, I do think Leinster will learn from all of these mistakes that they've made. I don't think that they will necessarily be as sloppy in the second or in the last quarter of the game. I don't think that they're going to be as passive in the last quarter of the game, because there were just a few mistakes and decision-making from the likes of Sam Prendergast. Just like, okay, why did you just do that? Why did you just kick the ball like that? Were you just afraid? Like, was that part of the system? It seems as though it was just a momentary lapse of, this is how we're going to play. So I do think Leinster will learn from these things. I do think they'll be stronger in the final than they were in the semi-final. That being said, I do think that the Bulls will be even more learning from their semi-final and be even better than they were in their semi-final. I think the potential for improvement for the Bulls is probably better than the potential for improvement for Leinster. Ultimately, it depends on what team shows up on the day. We don't know who's going to win until the day comes. I will leave my predictions in a video next week, I do think this is going to be such an amazing final, a repeat of last year, except for the fact that I think it'll be so much closer than last year's final. I think the Bulls have an actual chance and Leinster always have a chance. So it's going to be an absolute toss-up of a final next week. And for all my South Africans, let's also support Bafana this evening. It's the FIFA World Cup opener. And beyond that, have a great weekend and enjoy the rest of your days. Cheers.